course, here's the chief scoundrel. The scoundrel. You recognize that fella? Padre. Yeah, Padre. I think that's Masaji. Let's see. How about that little impish girl right there? Mani. Yeah. And yeah, there's Gomai. I think that's Franny. That's Mehera. That's Shireen. Now, in this year, the women were in the post office, and when I first moved to India, I was living in the trust compound, and every night I would go over to see Crhist. I don't know if she's there or not. She ought to be. I don't see her. Anyway, Crhist was one of Baba's close women disciples and best friends with Mehera in those days. And Crhist vividly remembered Baba's birthday the next year, 1926. In fact, this is the day after that. I'll come back to this. But in 1926, Baba celebrated his birthday publicly on a grand scale. You know, he usually didn't do that. I somehow had thought that it happened every year because there were a few years where it did happen. But no, he actually didn't. 1926 was one of the occasions he did. 1938, there's a film of it. Most years he didn't. But in 1926, they say that there were 50,000 people who came. Can you imagine that? I mean, now Amartiti still isn't that big. How they dealt with it, I cannot imagine. Water, and I guess for going to the bathroom, they would just go out in the fields. But it was a glorious event. Crhist really remembered what Baba was a sight to behold at that occasion. But that was the last time that Mehera and the women Mandali took part openly in such events. It was really right after that they really went into seclusion. And the men Mandali, for the most part, never saw them again. There were a couple much later, we're talking 30 years later, like Dr. Goher, who would come over to the men's side at Meherabad for work and messages, and then Mani at a certain point. But you know, I think it was in the 50s, some of you may have heard Mani talking about this, where she, I think Baba had been talking to Eruch, telling Eruch that when he died, when he dropped the body, he wanted Begin the Begin to be played 7 times. You may know the story. And Baba asked, do you know Begin the Begin? And Eruch didn't. So Baba called Mani over to sing it. I think that's the first time they ever saw each other, or at least in that way. I don't think they went so far as to talk to each other or anything wild like that. I mean, Mani sang Begin the Begin, and Eruch sat there like a stone, because Baba had told him to hear Begin the Begin. Baba hadn't told him to converse with Mani, so he didn't. And can you believe that? 1950s, before they really encountered each other.
In preparation for going overseas and what to do with Baba died, talk about it.
Yeah. So Eruch was not at all of a mood to chit-chat anyway. But also, I think if Baba told him to listen to Mani, he would have listened to Mani, period. Nothing more. So that's how separated they were. In fact, I asked Eruch one time, have you ever seen Mehera? Because I was noticing that even though Mehera would come into Mandali Hall every Sunday for a program where the Mandali would get tortured by his pilgrims on a weekly basis, I noticed that Eruch never looked in her direction. And I remember reading in the Ramayana that Ram and Sita and Lakshman were in exile 12 years in the forest, and Ram never looked above Sita's ankles, if you can imagine that, in the forest together for 12 years, out of deference to who she was. And Eruch was like evading the question. And so I asked him, have you ever seen Mehera? And Eruch was acting like, of course he did. He didn't actually say he did. He said, well, she comes in here every Sunday. Well, yeah, Eruch, but you never look. So then I went and said, well, did you ever speak to her? And he said, yeah, like, of course he had. He spoke to her in January 31st, 1968, when Baba had all the Mandali go over to the women's side, file past, and say, Jai Baba Mehera. I think that's the only time he ever spoke to her. So look at the separation that happened. And it began on Baba's birthday, 1926, apart. So when we're talking about the Tiffin Lectures, we're talking about the men's sphere. The women were not there at all. They were in their own universe. It was right there in the post office, not far away, but they had no contact with each other. This was could have happened in 1925, but couldn't have happened the next year. Now this is Meherabad Hill. I don't know, does it look familiar at all? Because it's a different picture now. One thing, it's all covered with trees. So they really should cut those trees down.
Yeah.
This is, okay, oops. Show some of the buildings. So here's, of course, the birthday boy. I think this is actually the day after his birthday. And this path, this is not the current path. The current path goes up on this side a bit. But this, let's see, I think that's the Jhopdi. Is that the Jhopdi? Or maybe the Jhopdi is here. I think it's here. It might be the bathing house. And this is the old Dharamshala, the old bungalow, which we now call the Dharamshala, right? And this is where the Mandali Hall is now. And the railway tracks are right here. That's the ridge, the embankment. Do you know what this is? That's actually the Sai Darbar. That's that meeting hall, right, that Baba had constructed. And you can see it's open, it doesn't have walls. And on this end of it, it's a little hard to see here, but there's a little cabin that Baba had built where he would go into seclusion. So it's quite an austere... Oh, and this is the post office right here. It's actually very close to the railway tracks. And they got an order from the British government to tear it down in the 1930s because it was too close to the railway tracks. And that's why the stones were available for use in constructing the Samadhi. So it was a barren, austere landscape back in those days, as you can see. I think it was something like that. It would have been Mehera, Khorshid, Mehera's mom, Khorshid's mom. Was Franey there? Mehera's sister? 5 or 6, something like that. Yeah. And they were, they had their own universe with Baba. If you've read, the books of Mehera, a lot of the stories, it was for Mehera, it was just a wonderful time with Baba. He was still speaking for a lot of it. Yeah, now this is Chanji, Framrose Dada Chanji, Baba's secretary, and the great diarist. A lot of what we know about the early years of Baba's advent comes from him.
He had wonderful cursive handwriting.
Yes.
Very clear and beautiful.
Except when he was writing in a rush. So I know both of those intimately. No, he did have beautiful handwriting. And he was the one who accompanied Baba on his travels to the West. I think there might have been 10 tours to the West in the 1930s, and he accompanied Baba on all but one of them. So a lot of the Westerners knew Baba in large part through Chanji. Chanji would write letters, and Chanji was the medium of communication. He was a very, very faithful, true disciple. He died in Kashmir in 1940. Was it 44? I think it was 1944. But we owe a great debt to this man. You know what, Baba? Okay, it says the secret is given away in the caption on top. He's playing cricket. And that was another feature of this, the Meherabad ashram. Sports were a big part of it. Baba would play cricket every day with the Mandalay. And then after these Meher ashram boys came in the picture, they would take part too. So 2 hours a day. It was like, a real part of the daily routine. Now that is the table cabin. We're right on the road here. This is the road to Ahmednagar, and that behind is the old Dharamshala. So it's a beautiful photo. Peter Nardine knows all this stuff in great detail, but at some point someone gave Padre a camera. But the real revolution happened a couple years later when somebody gave him some film. And he began taking photos. And he had an eye. And this is probably his photo. So you get a real idea of what it looked. So the table cabin was very close to the road in those days. Now it's been moved farther away. Here's Baba, this beautiful photo. January 11th, 1927. Yeah, now this is probably taken by Padre too, who must have waited for a train to come so that you could get the dimensions of everything. But we're standing probably right on the edge of the road, of the highway. Do you know what this is? That is the seclusion cabin in the side arbor. And the rest of it got torn down, but that remained. So Baba, this is one of the places where Baba wrote the book, actually. And do you know what that is there? No, that's on the other side of the road, actually, behind us, so to speak. That is the post office, the remains of it. Most of it was torn down, but a little bit was left for a while. And so you see the train, so you get a sense of the dimensions of things. This, I can't remember how long this survived. It might have been there in the 50s, in the 40s, when they had a Sahabas program there. Now this is the same view looking the other way. This is the post office, the remains of it. We're very close to the railway tracks from where this is taken. Yeah.
Was that an active post office? Was it working? Or was it just an old post office?
It wasn't, by the time Baba got there, it was an old post office. It had been an active place, part of the, it was a British military installation, Meherabad was. And I imagine the post office was a part of that whole activity.
Just like the water tower.
Like the water tower, yeah. Which was that. It was a water tank, in fact. Before it was bought by Adi Kiarani's father. A lot of you would know Adi Kiarani, would have met him, right? He died in 1980, was it? Yeah. And his father was a wealthy man in Ahmednagar. And a lot of the major properties associated with Meher Baba were thanks to him. So he actually bought this from the British after World War I and then gave it for Baba's use. He wasn't a devotee of Baba's exactly, but he always came through for Baba, and his wife, Gulmai, was very strongly Baba's. Baba called her his spiritual mother. And of course, two of his sons, Adi and Rustam, were close disciples. So he was surrounded by Baba lovers everywhere. And he also, his family home in Ahmednagar is the trust office today. That compound is his family home. And he was instrumental in rigging the auction at which Meherabad was purchased. You know, used his influence, so they were able to pick that up. So he played a big role in these places connected with Meher Baba. Yeah, so this is now we call it the Dharamshala, the old bungalow. As I say, Mandali Hall was built there, and the Pilgrim Center would be over here somewhere, built in 1970s.
The same size as it is now originally?
I think so. I think it was, yeah. Yeah, so Kushal Quarters was Adi's family's residential quarters. I think it was bought in 1924, it might have been, or 25. I've forgotten, right around then. And this is what the tomb, what is now the tomb, looked like in those days. It's the crypt room, it was called. And to the right of it, right over here, was a bunch of little cabins called the Sadak Ashram. It was still there in 1969. Did anybody here go to Darshan in 69? Was it there? Do you remember?
I don't remember that.
I think it may have been. Or if not the cabins, the platform may have been there still, which is now where the women's graves are, in that area. But in these days, it was just this little hut, but it was intensively used by Baba during, 27, 28. This is the water tank, which now has a second floor, and above that a tower. So this is the tower at Meherabad. That was all built in 1938. But it was built by the British, as said, to be a water tank, and the walls are very, very thick. When Baba wanted doors made there and there, it was a big job. They had, with picks, they had to carve through stone like that thick, It was really a hard job. But before that, Baba would get into it by, I think that's a window there. He would climb into these little slit windows and jump inside. He was very agile. And he did seclusion work there a lot. He spent the night there a lot, even in 26, actually. And he wrote some of the book there, too. So by the time that Baba got there, it was no longer used for that purpose. But it had been. It had been. That was its purpose. The British did very good construction work. A couple of us went to this place Baba went to about 30, 40 miles south of Meherabad, and saw a reservoir and prison, actually, that was there, and it was the same kind of stonework, exactly the same kind. And we're a little bit later, so this is 1927, maybe August, September, and these are the Meher Ashram kids. And as you can see, the doors were built, and so they were living there in those days. So in 1927, Upper Meherabad was really in the picture. They really had to work, It was hard physical, and Baba himself would do it. He wasn't sort of a upper-class snob avatar. He got his hands dirty. Yeah, so this is after this wouldn't be a Prem Ashram yet. By this time, the Prem Ashram was probably there. This is Chota Baba, who was at that time experiencing the sixth plane consciousness. Now this is from a later period, but you do see some of the Mandali who were there from earlier. Let's see, okay. Anybody recognize this fellow? Hindu. And this is Boa Saheb, he was called. This is Rao Sab. This is Chanji. You, of course, don't know who this guy is. This is Gustaji, Baijul, Chuggin. I forget who that is. Although it's down there somewhere. Let's see. I'm sorry. Anyway, I won't take. Oh, that's Nashwan Dastur, actually. And that's Vishnu, one of Baba's very early disciples, who was there right until he died in the 60s. December, the end of December 1927, this tremendous upheaval, I don't know what the word for it is, of love happened, explosion of love, I don't know what else to call it, happened among the boys of the Mehera ashram, and that's the name of the actual school that Baba founded. And among a group of the boys, 20 maybe, I'm not quite sure how many, they were overpowered by, they were just weeping day and night, and a bunch of them were experiencing the inner planes. They were incapable of taking part in ordinary classroom activities. So that group Baba segregated, and the Prem Ashram was his name, basically, for that bunch of kids. But the Mehera Ashram is the actual school. And the Prem Ashram was the elect group of boys. Alaba was not in the Prem Ashram. You would think he'd be a perfect candidate for it. He was always getting overpowered by love for Baba, all those stories. But that didn't happen to him then. He was actually just a Mehera Ashram school member. But so these are a lot of the disciples from this very period. Of the 20s. Now let's see. So then, some of the just to go over this history a little bit more. In 1923, in April, Baba left the Manzili Neem. You know the Manzili Neem? That was that ashram Baba established in Bombay, 22 to 23. Where he gave a lot of the initial real spiritual training to his men disciples, but he closed it and came up to Ahmednagar in 23, and Baba spent some time in Happy Valley. You know Happy Valley? The sort of little scenic, almost like a little park, about 4 or 5 kilometers from Meherabad, and it's a famous place associated with Ram and Sita. And Baba would go there a lot over the years. This is before Meherabad now, right? There was no such thing as Meherabad. But then overnight, Baba walked through the night with his mandali into Ahmednagar to the home of Kaikushru and Gulmai, the parents of Adi and Rustam, because Rustam was getting married to Frani. I don't know if this, some of you will know this, and maybe for others it'll be confusing, but Adi was, of course, the son of, Rustam was the oldest son of these 2 pillars, Kaikushru and Gulmai in Ahmednagar, kind of the reason for Baba's going to Ahmednagar. And Frani, you know who Frani was? Mehera's sister. So Baba had actually arranged for their wedding, for their marriage, and so Baba was coming to attend. And when he got there, after walking through the night, there were a lot of Zoroastrians who were staying there for the occasion. And Baba heard from Adi, his disciple, that the Zoroastrians there were just totally bad-mouthing Baba, because the Zoroastrians were very hostile to him. So when Baba heard that, he just got up and strode out the door, and all the mandali just dropped whatever they were doing, shaving or going to the toilet or whatever, and just followed him. And Baba just walked and started walking, so they followed him. And he walked right out of town on the road south and stopped under a tree, a neem tree, in front of what is now Meherabad. And there's a whole story of how he had water from the well, and a farmer brought him food and all that kind of thing. So that was his first visit to Meherabad. So take a look at that. In a space of 16 hours, Baba walked from Happy Valley right past Meherabad. The road goes right past Meherabad to Kushru Quarters, which is now the trust office, out to Meherabad. So there does appear to be a significance to that, because those are the three main places now in Meherabad. And then, there was a big to-do about, the wedding and everything. But Baba wound up staying there for a couple weeks. And then over the next 2 years, Baba was traveling all over the place. South India, North India, Persia, but then would keep coming back to Meherabad from time to time and stay there. And nobody knew whether he was going to really make this a main place of his or not. Gulmai passionately hoped it would be so. She just adored Baba. But he did come back in 24. A lot of the Gamala Yoga happened. I think they built the Jhopdi then. Also, Mehera and Khurshid and their moms moved in that year, 1924, living in the post office. But then in January 1925, Baba moved in and stayed there. And that was the beginning of this really dynamic period of the first long stay. And right away, Baba started... got a lot of activities going. There was the Mehera Charitable Hospital and Dispensary was opened in March of 1925, and it was a very active hospital dispensary. He had hired a doctor, and a lot of people came, and I think people like Padre and so forth got some of their original training in those fields through that experience. He opened the Hazrat Babajan School in March of 1925, and that was a very different school. That was really a school for Erangun kids, and including a lot of the Mahars or untouchables. And Erangun was even by the standards of Maharashtrian villages, was a very poor one. And a lot of low-caste people, Mahars they're called, not just Mahars, but there were a lot of them. And the caste distinctions were still very severe in those days. But Baba began to cultivate connections with a bunch of these children, and gradually, and others too, and drew them into the Hazrat Babajan School, which in various forms and various locations continued over the next 3-4 years. So that's something quite different from the Mehera Ashram School. Now, with Erangun kids, how do I say, these were really poor, really illiterate, really backward people. They just had no education at all. So it was like a kind of a real basic education that Baba was trying to give them, actually. But when he started the Mehera Ashram School, it was a very different kind of kid who really could do things. There's just, you weren't going to get an Erangun kid to read Hafiz. It was not going to happen. It wasn't out of their universe. But so the later school, Baba really had a very different vision for what was going to happen. So the Hazrat Babajan School and the Mehera Ashram, although they're both schools, were very different from each other. And also Baba opened a Dharamshala in 1925. A Dharamshala is like a hostel for pilgrims. It's called the Upasni Sarai, after Upasni Maharaj. And the reason there was a need for that was that Baba's reputation was really spreading widely in Maharashtra, and a lot of pilgrims were coming for his darshan and blessings and for talks which he would give. up until he started his silence. So they created a dharamshala where they would stay. In fact, I think it was mostly for women. He already had a kind of primitive quarters before that.
Was there like a chain of command in establishing these hospitals and dharamshalas? Like the Baba's directive, or was like the board's directive?
Yeah, he had. He always put people in charge of everything, and I'm forgetting who all they were. He would have somebody who would be the superintendent of the whole mandali. And for the food, and when there were activities like a school, there'd be a principal, and for the dispensary there'd be a lead doctor and all of that. He definitely had that, and somebody would be in charge. I think the mandali tended to learn before very long that when Baba wanted someone to be in, or maybe I shouldn't say this in the LA group, but if Baba wanted somebody to be in charge, the best response, you know, Roadrunner? You mean Roadrunner? Beep, beep, psh, you're out of there. It was asking for trouble, you know. I'm being a little bit facetious, obviously, but it was not an easy job, you know. But he definitely had people in charge of things, and as you would know, he was really particular about how everything was done. I mean, the slightest screw up, and Baba would call you to account for it. So that's one thing about this Advent, as you all would know as well as I, that Baba really was an extremely practical avatar. I think they all were. But Baba really made that one of his themes, that work really had to be done well in every kind of mundane domain of things that you might not think would have much importance. But Baba really cared that if you built something that worked, I remember there's a story, and maybe I'll get this wrong, but of Rao Sahib. You may know Rao Sahib, one of the early mandali, and I think Baba was saying he needed 5,000 rupees. If I get this wrong, please correct me, but I'm remembering from reading this. And he needed it by, say, 3 days from then. And nobody was responsive, and finally Rao Sahib said, okay, I'll get it. I have to go back to Bombay. That's where he was from. 5,000 rupees in those days was real money. You know, it was a lot. And so Baba said, you have to be back by this time. And he said, yes, Baba. Well, that day came and he hadn't arrived. And he came the next day, and Baba was absolutely furious. You didn't come on time. And he said nothing, but just came up and gave Baba the 5,000 rupees. And Baba burned it. Can you believe that? I mean, what a shocker that would be. He didn't care about the money. He cared about his order being obeyed. So that's how it was. The mandali got that training.
Unless you have another stopping point in mind, I've noticed there's a lot of activity in the room. It might be a good idea to take that 10-minute break.
Sure. Let me run to the end of this history, and then after that I'll resume with the literary history. I'm almost there. What time are we at? We're at 11:20. Okay, so in the like October 1920, we're in 1926 now, right? Baba was giving signs of being dissatisfied with the Meherabad ashram. And there was one little episode to illustrate what the tenor of life was like, where 3 of the mandali were taken to task for not being enthusiastic enough about how they are doing their duties. Now, I don't know, if you read about those periods, you can imagine Baba had probably been harassing them and, you know, asked them to do something, and whatever they did, Baba would find fault until they were about to lose their minds, and then something would come up and Baba said, where's your enthusiasm for this? It's like, well, I think Padre was one of them, and maybe Arjun and somebody else. So what's the right response when the mandali aren't being enthusiastic enough? Well, close the ashram. So he did. He actually did. I mean, there were other reasons too, but that was one of his excuses. Not only that, he tore the buildings down. They had just put them up in 1925. And a bunch of them, like the Sai Darbar and the Mechanikas and the Upasniswara, were all torn down. Now, not only would this seem like erratic behavior in the extreme, not just that, but think about it for a second. These are young men who were supposed to be building careers and getting married in the opinions of their community. Instead, they were following this utter fraud, Meher Baba, because that's how he was regarded among the Zoroastrians. But at least they could say, well, look, like Mahatma Gandhi, this noble man, Mahatma Gandhi, well, Meher Baba, hospitals and schools and care for at least he's a good philanthropist. Well, now he's a flake who can't keep these things going for more than a year. It would be really, really hard to face your community after this. And Baba, there's a really good Tiffin lecture on this very subject where Baba basically is telling them, when you're with a Sadguru, this is a different kind of a game. I finished my work with these things. The work is done, and I tore down the scaffolding again. When you're with the Sadguru, when you're with a perfect one, you're not getting goody-goody work according to understanding of the world. This is a different kind of inner work that I'm doing. He was quite straight with them about it, and they got a real experience of that. So they tore it down. Baba was going to go to Persia for 6 months, taking some of the mandali, and then he made others would come later, etc., etc. And then Baba scaled it back, and then Baba wound up canceling it, and they went to Lonavala, and they had a great holiday, actually, which they really needed. And then Baba went down to Bombay for a couple weeks, during which time Rustam came to him, Adi's older brother, and said, Baba, would you like to come back to Meherabad? And Baba said, yes. He had just closed the whole place down, and he came back and started up the Hazrat Babajan school and some of the activities. But then his real focus was on a new school, which was the Mehera Ashram. So now we're really into a different phase. And the Mehera Ashram got founded in May of 1927, and in July, a lot of the students came, a whole bunch from Persia, including Sfendiar and others. And the end of August 1927, which is the last Tiffin lecture, is August 30th, was really the demarcation point. They finished up a lot of the stuff they were doing before then. And clearly Baba's focus was now going to be on the school, Mehera Ashram school. And at the end of December, that eruption of love happened, and Baba formed the Prema Ashram, and then there are all these stories connected with the Prema Ashram and the kids at it. Ramju Abdullah's book, Sobs and Throbs, can give you a contemporary account written by one of Baba's Mandali. And then we come into that whole phase of the early Meherabad period, which is really after the Tiffin lectures thing. In 1929, that came to an end, and Baba began to wind it all down. And Baba really moved on, and Meherabad was kind of left behind at that point. It came back to life later, in the late 1930s, but the early Meherabad phase was finished. So let's take a break and resume with some of the literary history of this period after that.